What if the one person who could destroy your life was the same person you stopped to save in a storm? That's not a movie plot. That actually happened to a man named Marcus Webb, a single dad from Ohio who was just trying to get home to his kid. And what followed changed both of their lives in ways nobody could have predicted. Stay with me, because this story is going to hit you somewhere deep. Marcus Webb was 34 years old, working 2 jobs, raising his 7-year-old daughter Lily on his own. Her mom had left 3 years earlier. No warning, no goodbye note, just gone one Tuesday morning. So Marcus became everything. The dad who packed the lunch, braided the hair badly, read the bedtime stories in silly voices, and still somehow made it to work by 7 in the morning. He wasn't complaining. He loved that little girl more than air. But life had been hitting Marcus hard lately, really hard. He was in the middle of a custody hearing. His ex had come back into the picture, and she wanted full custody of Lily. Her new husband had money, a big house, a lawyer in a sharp suit. Marcus had a rented apartment, a 12-year-old car, and a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days. The judge assigned to his case was someone he'd never met, someone he only knew by name, Judge Sandra Harlow. Cold name, official, distant, the kind of name that made your stomach drop when you heard it in a courthouse hallway. The hearing was in 2 days. Marcus had no idea what was coming. It was a Thursday night in late November, the kind of night where the sky turns that ugly dark gray, and the wind starts pushing you sideways before the storm even hits. Marcus had just finished his second shift. He worked days at a shipping warehouse and evenings at a gas station near the edge of town. He was tired in his bones, the kind of tired that coffee doesn't fix. He was driving home on Route 9, a long stretch of road with almost no lights and nothing but fields on either side. The rain had started coming down hard. Not regular rain, the kind that sounds like gravel hitting your windshield. That's when he saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road, next to a silver car with its hazard lights blinking. She was in a gray coat, no umbrella, completely soaked. She looked like she was in her mid-50s. And she was just standing there, not on her phone, not waving, just standing there like she didn't know what to do. Marcus almost didn't stop. He thought about it. Middle of the night, isolated road, storm getting worse. He had Lily to think about. If something happened to him, there was nobody else for her. He drove past the woman by about 50 feet, and then he stopped. He sat there for 3 seconds, watching her in his rearview mirror. This woman standing in the rain. And he thought, what if that was someone's mom? What if nobody stops for her tonight? He put the car in reverse. He pulled up next to her and rolled down his window. She looked startled, not scared, just surprised that someone had actually stopped. You need help, he said. She looked at him for a moment. My car just died. I've been standing here for 40 minutes. My phone is at 2% and I couldn't get through to anyone. Marcus got out of the car, in the pouring rain, in his gas station uniform. He wasn't a mechanic. He knew the basics, enough to get by. He popped her hood, looked around with the flashlight on his phone, and figured out fast that it wasn't something he could fix on the side of the road. The battery was completely dead, not just drained. Something had shorted out. I can't fix this tonight, he told her honestly. But I can call a tow truck and I can drive you somewhere warm while you wait. She looked at him carefully. Not suspicious exactly, more like she was reading him. All right, she said quietly. He drove her to a diner about 4 miles up the road. The kind of place that's open all night and smells like coffee and bacon grease and has those little jukeboxes on every table that nobody uses anymore. He paid for her coffee because she said her wallet was in her bag in the car and she hadn't grabbed it when she locked up. $2.30. That's what her coffee cost. While they waited for the tow truck, they talked. She asked him why he was out so late. He told her about the 2 jobs. She asked if he had family. He told her about Lily, not about the custody case, just about Lily, about how she'd made him a card for his birthday last month that said, "Happy birthday, Daddy," because she still couldn't spell birthday right, and he'd kept it on the fridge. The woman laughed at that. A real laugh. The kind you can't fake. She told him her name was Sandra. She didn't say her last name. She asked about his daughter's favorite things, and he talked about Lily's obsession with frogs, real frogs, not toy frogs, and how she'd named every frog she'd ever seen at the pond near their apartment. Marcus found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in weeks. They sat in that diner for an hour and 20 minutes waiting for the tow truck. When it finally came, Sandra stood up and shook his hand. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "I mean that." He shrugged like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. 2 days later, Marcus walked into a courthouse in a shirt he'd ironed 3 times because he kept messing it up. He had a folder of papers, photos of his apartment, Lily's school reports, letters from her teacher, saying she was happy and healthy and doing great in class. He sat down at the table across from his ex and her husband and their polished lawyer. And then the judge walked in. Marcus looked up. His heart stopped. It was Sandra Harlow, the woman from the diner, the woman from the rain, the woman whose coffee he'd paid for with $2.30. She looked at him. He looked at her. And for one single second, the whole courtroom felt like it was underwater. He felt sick. Not because he'd done anything wrong. He hadn't. He'd just helped someone. But now his brain was spinning. Would she think he'd known? Would she think it was some kind of setup? Would this actually make things worse? His public defender leaned over and whispered, "You okay? You look white as a sheet." Marcus couldn't even answer. Judge Harlow sat down, organized her papers, and called the case to order. Her voice was exactly what you'd expect from a judge, steady. No emotion, all business. Nothing in her face gave anything away. The hearing went forward. The other lawyer presented his case, talked about the house, the income, the stability, all the things Marcus couldn't match on paper. Marcus's lawyer did his best, but you could feel the imbalance in the room. Money talks, even in a courtroom. Maybe especially in a courtroom. Marcus testified. He talked about Lily's routine, her school, their mornings, their nights. He talked about the frog pond. He talked about the birthday card still on the fridge. His voice cracked once, and he hated himself for it. But he kept going. When it was done, Judge Harlow said she'd review everything and deliver her decision the following week. Marcus walked out of that courthouse not knowing anything, not knowing if he'd won, not knowing if she recognized him, not knowing if the next week would end with him losing his daughter. It was the longest week of his life. 7 days later, he got a phone call from the courthouse. Judge Harlow had made her decision. He stood in the parking lot of the warehouse at lunch, hands shaking, listening. Primary custody, Marcus. His ex would get scheduled visits, but Lily would stay with her dad, stay in her school, stay near her frog pond. Marcus sat down on the curb of that parking lot and cried. Not the quiet kind, the ugly kind, the kind where you're gasping a little, the kind that comes from somewhere you didn't even know was hurting that bad. Now here's where people always ask, did the woman on the road change the judge's decision? The answer is both simpler and more complicated than you'd think. A few months later, Marcus actually found out through a mutual contact that Judge Harlow had been seen at a community event talking about his case, not the details. Judges don't do that, but about character, about how the paperwork in front of a judge only tells part of a story, about how what a person does when nobody's watching, when there's no audience, no reward, no reason to help except being human. That tells you something real. She hadn't based her legal decision on a random act of kindness. Judges don't work like that, and she was too professional for that. But she said in a public talk that the case reminded her of something she already believed, that a parent's character shows up in the small moments, not the big ones. Marcus had no idea he was being tested that night on Route 9. He wasn't being tested. He was just tired and wet and human, and he stopped anyway. And somewhere in the middle of all that rain and bad luck and courtroom nerves, something quietly worked out the way it was supposed to. Lily still can't spell birthday. She's 9 now. The card is still on the fridge. Marcus works one job these days. He got a logistics coordinator position at the warehouse, more money, better hours. He coached Lily's soccer team this past fall even though he knows almost nothing about soccer, and she thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He never reached out to Judge Harlow after the case. That felt like the right call. Some things you don't need to follow up on. Some debts aren't meant to be settled with a conversation. But he thinks about that night sometimes. About how close he came to just driving past her. About those 3 seconds sitting in his car watching her in his rearview mirror. 3 seconds. That's all it was. Here's what this story really is. Underneath all the coincidence and the courtroom drama and the rain, it's about the fact that most of us go through hard times, carrying things nobody can see. Marcus was 2 days away from potentially losing his daughter, and he still stopped for a stranger. Not because he was trying to be a good person loudly, because quietly, in his bones, that's just what he was. We live in a world where it's really easy to keep driving, To tell yourself someone else will stop. To say you're too tired, too busy, too scared. And sometimes keeping driving is the right call. You have to trust your gut. But sometimes, the person standing in the rain is just a person who needs 2 minutes of your time and a cup of coffee. And the ripple from that tiny moment moves out further than you'll ever be able to see from where you're standing. Marcus didn't stop to be rewarded. He didn't stop because someone was watching. He stopped because Lily was watching, not literally. She was asleep at home with a neighbor, but in the sense that everything he does as the man he wants her to see when she grows up. That's it. That's the whole thing. You don't need a storm or a courtroom or a judge on a dark road for this to matter. You just need to ask yourself, in the small moments when nobody's watching, what kind of person do you want to be? Because those moments are always adding up somewhere. You just can't always see the math.